You and I both know how this match review is going to go. You're going to tell me this was an ugly and worrisome win, and I'm going to try to convince you why these 3 points are important to bring Barcelona a step closer to the Liga title. But instead of waiting for one of the 5 headlines to try to convince you, I'm going to start with that actually today before we even get to the 5 headlines. Look, it's January, you got 6 points out of 6 points with Robert Lewandowski suspended for 3 matches, and you got to rest Araujo and Jong for a midweek clash with Real Sociedad, and you even got to rest Xavi for a half midweek in that Copa match against Ceuta. So I do understand the fear that Barcelona are once again back to their old ways. They can't break down a 5 at the back, and a better, stronger opponent would have taken Barca to the cleaners today. But I can't go with you on that because of the very nature of this rotation and these suspensions. As we'll get into, the omissions today, or those that weren't selected or suspended, are just as important as those that were put on the field by Xavi. If this is a better side, it's Araujo in there for Roberto, no questions asked. And Barca's defensive transition is much, much better. And because we are going to get into all that a little bit later, the last thing before we begin, Sergio Busquets hit number 700 today, and I know numbers can just be numbers, but 700 is a whole lot. Just look up the total appearance leaders for a lot of your favorite FC Barcelona players through the years and realize just how much 700 is when it comes to FC Barcelona first team appearances. And we can wax poetic about Busquets later because he was a 5 headlines from Barcelona's 1-0 win over Getafe. 1 is high enough line. Barca started this game with a high line. We'll get to the changes later. But they certainly did survive some early warning signs from Getafe. 2 offsides from Sergio Roberto's right side that Barca were fortunate on, but Getafe weren't that close either. And they were targeting him, clearly, when he would invert and go forward. There was another one, the 32nd minute, right down the middle. That's 3 offsides just in that first half. And that's why the stats lie a little bit here. Between Roberto, Koundé, Christensen, Balde, and Busquets, only Roberto finished the day having 1 more duels, ground or aerial, than 50% of them. But anyone watching knows that Christensen's work in anticipating and tracking Unal and Koundé's work backing him up is what gave Barca their only solidity today. Even if he didn't win the first ball, Christensen put Barca in a position to win the second ball, which isn't tracked as well with stats, and is why they had some control in a match that didn't look like they had any control at times. Another big help to that high line is the current form, and I'm hoping the best form, of Marc-Andre ter Stegen, and that can't be understated. He had 3 saves in the game and 1 big clearance, and while he can at times come a bit far off his line, all 3 saves come from inside the box, so his timing was perfect. In particular, his 41st minute save with Mayoral on the break in a 1v1 situation, and then another counterattack 2 minutes later, those moments helped keep the line in this game, and I think is what gave Barcelona the confidence to suffer the way they needed in the second half. 2 is same old Getafe. You can say, well, there's Bahar Mayoral, and of course, the La Masia product in Carlos Alenia doing his thing, looking good today. And there's also El Nacional and some other attacking talent that maybe Getafe didn't have in previous seasons. But it's still the same old Getafe. Damian Suarez and Jane still doing their thing along the back line, making things difficult for Barcelona when it comes to the foul department and putting the referee in a tough spot too. In the first half, where the personality of this game was found, there were fouls on Xavi, on Pedri, on Rafinha, and Roberto that all went unpunished. Which is fine if the ref wanted to control the game and at that point was being quite yellow adverse. But it certainly didn't help Barcelona keep control of a match that wound up having fouls every few minutes. I'm actually going to leave this to you. You can put your answer down in the comments below. Is it a good thing or a bad thing that Barcelona are willing to sling the mud with Getafe? And when I say that, I mean Dembele's harsh, I don't know if it was actually a red, but harsh tackle that came in that second half where I think the closest instance anybody had to a red was probably that Dembele. It looked shoulder to shoulder to me, but either way, Barcelona clearly physically were up to Getafe and unafraid, if you will, at home. They weren't afraid to get punched in the mouth and punch a little bit back. But that means that if Barcelona are going to play the Getafe way, then they're going to have to win the Getafe way, and well, that seems to be the theme from the game. Headline 3 is to run and when. I totally understand the negativity coming from this match, and I saw the same thing you did. It was, we'll say, boring. It seemed like Barcelona didn't have many ideas. And I think there's a lot going into that. The Barcelona do have ideas, but the personnel that Xavi had available to him didn't even allow him to kind of go forth with some of those ideas. So what I mean by that was that something was clearly missing from the Barca attack today. Something that we saw against Real Madrid when Barcelona were playing their best football of the season. And that was obviously those runs in behind. Something that is 100% necessary against a 5 at the back that Getafe were playing. And that does lead me to talking a bit about the absentees. Lewandowski is the point of reference in the middle that Ansu is not. Ansu's touch was letting him down today, but even if it wasn't, Getafe only had 1 person tracking him in the middle when Lewandowski usually has 2, which meant that Xavi didn't have as much room to get in behind. And while I'm not sure why Balde came out at halftime yet, he was doing well getting forward on the wing and overlapping Dembélé, but he wasn't very successful today when he had to come inside. And unfortunately, having Balde and Dembélé out there on the left wing together does get a bit redundant and allows Getafe to defend them 2v2 instead of bringing over the extra help and allowing that third man, that being Getafe's third defender, to vacate space for either Pedri or Gabi, or sometimes De Jong in those circumstances, to get into that half space. Xavi did try to solve this issue by taking off Balde, who I think was unfortunate if he was yanked for not precautionary reasons, because it should have been Dembélé or Rafinha to come off at that point. That's the real solution to that problem because both of them need to be on the right wing. But that's not possible when your only first-team attackers available are Ansu, Dembélé, and Rafinha. To me, the moment was a bit too pressurized and the game a bit too nasty for Angel Alarcon. Suspensions for Torres and Lewandowski and no money, even after seeing Memphis leave, also add to that problem. So that was the situation today, and they had to make the most of it. The other big omission is the man I already mentioned, that being Frenkie de Jong, who obviously, and this makes a lot of sense, was rotated for that Real Sociedad midweek clash. But while I still search for the term to use here, I want to call it some kind of positional hurricane from De Jong. I guess I'm calling him a positional hurricane. But anyway, all the ground he covers in the midfield, offensively and defensively, I think was really important against a team like Getafe, who are so sturdy in setting up those lines. Not to say that he's some kind of attacking midfielder in between the lines kind of player, but the fact that he, Gabi, and Pedri can all find space in between the lines does open up a team that's going to play in this devout 5-4-1 that Getafe was set up in today. And I would also say that while Gabi seems like he's operating in complete chaos, it's De Jong that I think operates in a bit more chaos on that left side. Because yeah, he can get forward at times, he can sit in deep, but Gabi's going to keep pushing and pushing forward. And if somebody's going to have to run in behind and cover, it's going to have to be Dembélé or Balde if they're both on the left side. And while Gabi is no slouch on the ball, he's not going to drive forward and dribble the way De Jong does. And it sounds counterintuitive that I'm saying missing De Jong's dribbling from the midfield meant that Barcelona were getting a bit too dribbly and predictable themselves on that left wing, Balde and Dembélé. But that's kind of the case. When you have three guys who are supposed to dribble just a bit or a bit more than everybody else on the right side, where it's just that 1v1 isolation, well, it does open up a little more space for the other two guys, that being Balde and Dembélé, to not have to dribble with the ball, which I know it seems counterintuitive that there's already too much dribbling, add another dribbler, but again, that's the chaos that De Jong adds that I think breaks down these kind of oppositions. 4 is breaking through. At least Barcelona did follow the game plan today, and they got their goal. It comes in the 35th minute, scored by Pedri, but a lot of it's about the pressure that Barcelona had put Getafe's back line under. They turn Getafe over. It's a big win by Christensen again, and Rafinha, who had recently switched with Dembélé on the wings that we saw about midway through the half there, to which I think was to get Dembélé going and have him be the isolated one on the right wing, which we'll talk more about on the podcast. But then Pedri making the run down the middle and finishing well. And this is how Barcelona, and this Xavi's Barcelona, should score their goals in open play. Honestly, I know that in theory, culés want to see Barcelona scoring their goals death by 1,000 passes. But look at Atletico Madrid and Real Madrid and Real Betis and this game today. Their goals are coming because they're putting their opponent under such distress in their own half of the field. They're making it difficult for them. And I think through the years when Barcelona were struggling, if there's one thing you had to ask for, was it the high pressure or was it goals with 1,000 passes? Well, the way the game is working and the way that teams are so much more accustomed to and prepared for those horizontal passing back and forth, and teams prepared for the Barca metronome that they weren't 10 to 15 years ago, well, that means that Barcelona are going to have to be direct at times, and that means use your superior quality in direct access to the goal when you put the other team under pressure. So that's a goal that I'm happy with. I know it aesthetically isn't this beautiful, perfect team goal, but it gets the job done, and in games like this against Getafe, you need to get those kind of goals. And headline 5 is holding on. This is all about the second half, and I think where the greatest points of contention are. For halftime, Alba comes on for Balde, as we already discussed, and Christensen, who apparently had a little discomfort in his hamstring on the left side. That was reported by Helena Condis, who is a trusted source. So he comes out, Eric Garcia comes in. We also saw Kessié come on for Rafinha in the 62nd minute, going to a 4 midfield setup for Barca, which did look a bit like Pedri as a false 9, with Ansu on the left and Dembélé on the right, but don't think of it as a 4-3-3 in build-up. It's a 3-2-5, once again, trying to put Getafe under a ton of pressure with that 5 at the back, kind of mirroring your opponent, which is one of those tactics we keep talking about this season with Xavi, where Xavi ball seems to be a lot about trying to use your wings and width when you have to, and mirror what your opponent is doing as far as the horizontal nature of the field. But as we discussed last year as well, one of the big problems when you have Busquets, who wind up being the man of the match, sure, but when he and Eric Garcia share the field together, that does slow Barcelona's ability to horizontally move side to side. I guess instead of horizontally, I'll say laterally. but that lateral defensive transition from Barcelona slows up when it's Busquets and Eric Garcia, who, as I've said many, many times before, individually, when they're surrounded by runners and physical forces like Araujo and like Koundé and Jong and Pedri and Gavi, when there are guys who can cover for them, they make a ton of sense because of what they do for you on the ball. Busquets is also, in that midfield, the best ball winner that Barcelona has. So when he does have these runners to make up for those moments when he's not in those spots, he still makes sense, that being Busquets. Eric Garcia, very much the same. We saw how his passing really opened up that counterattack for Barca in the second half, where they probably should have had a second. But together, laterally, it just slows everything down. And Barcelona under a ton of pressure in that second half. I think that's one of the primary reasons. Then we saw Alonso on for Roberto for the final 15 minutes, which did push Koundé out to the right back spot, which seems like, well, why would you want to put your best defender at that moment on the right side? But don't worry, Xavi kind of did have that covered. He stayed, that being Koundé, rather narrow to help with defensive transitions, basically trusting that Pedri and Busquets' ball retention abilities were good enough to handle any Getafe pressure, which they did pretty well. And I do send you back to like the 81st minute, where Pedri winds up keeping control for Barca in a really pivotal spot of the field. And I think that was the kind of moment when that turn, of course, that feint and that turn from Pedri gave me a big confidence that, hey, maybe Barcelona can hold on here. And it's not just me. I think we should all have a bit more trust in Xavi's ability to suffer and to dig in. I know it's not going to get any compliments of their style of play. When Atletico Madrid a few seasons ago won the Liga, well, nobody really gave them any compliments for the way they got it done. But Barcelona can fly high at times when it comes to their biggest rivals, and they have done that at times this season. But there are also times when they had to suffer, and this suffering is what wins you La Liga. I want to remind you too, defensively, I know you see the faces, Eric and Alba and Alonso, and you're worried, and Roberto in that first half. I know those are worrisome faces along a back line, because in previous seasons, a lot of those faces had told us, do not trust us on this back line. Yet Barcelona's defense has only conceded, I remind you, 3 goals total in the Liga. We're almost halfway point to the domestic season, and Barca have only conceded 3 goals outside of El Clasico, and 6 goals total counting that game. So I think at this point in the year, maybe that back line, regardless of the faces, does deserve a little bit of trust. Of course, as I already mentioned, Ter Stegen being in the prime form of his career has helped a ton in that department as well. It was sad to see that both Ansu and Kessie, who could have put this game away in the second half, didn't, because it felt like Barcelona, yes, they needed that second goal, but hey, they suffered, they got the job done, and Busquets being the man of the match kind of tells you the kind of match it was. It is 3 points in the end, so objective completed. And before we go, I want to mention too, the Barça Femení, we'll probably talk about this more on the podcast tomorrow. They did win the Spanish Super Cup. That was a trophy that did elude them in that treble-winning season, so they got it done in a 3-0 win over Real Sociedad. We'll break that down a little bit on the show tomorrow as well. We don't have any time today because I had so much to talk about with this 1-0 win over Getafe. But either way, Barcelona on to the next one. It's the Copa del Rey midweek against Real Sociedad. That's quarterfinals. And as I remind you, Barcelona needing trophies. I mean, they do. They still need trophies. Having won the Spanish Super Cup, more and more is needed in that trophy case for Xavi to kind of stake his claim to say, hey, I'm real. I don't need more learning experience. I know who I am on the Barcelona manager. And those trophies wind up giving credibility to that idea and to that mission. So onward we go. And until next time, as always, Forza Barça.